K.T. Ravindran sir is an urban designer practicing from Delhi. He's a member of the Governing Council of INTAC. He's a trustee of the Madhavan Nair Foundation in Kochi. He was a member of the advisory board for the United Nations Capital Master Plan of New York. He taught urban design for 3 decades in SPA Delhi. He was a dean and senior academic advisor of the RICS School of Built Environment, former chairman of Delhi Urban Art Commission, and was the founding president of the Institute of Urban Designers of India. He was awarded the 2022 Gold Medal for Education by the Indian Institutes of Architects at the National Convention. He has traveled extensively across the world, and his current practice includes design of greenfield cities, cultural buildings, memorials, adaptive reuse, and urban conservation. His works and research are published in journals and books internationally. He has consistently pursued sustainable architecture and urban design, championing the cause in multiple international forums and academia. It will be an honor to hear from you, sir.
I have an hour to talk to you about some issues which I think are critical for Chennai as well as for the rest of the country. So I've mostly organized the information on the basis of my experience. It's not taken from anywhere. It's not book-generated knowledge, but it's experience-generated. And therefore, I am encompassing my entire gamut of experience rather than just focusing on one specific issue. Having said that, I've organized the information in 3 different categories. First is about the relevance or the need for urban design strategies in cities. Second thing is about sustainability. And the third issue is post-pandemic city. So I started my baby steps in Chennai in SAP, where I was a student almost half a century ago, a little more than half a century ago. And I've lived all around the country in different cities. And last 40 years, my base has been Delhi. And I taught urban design in SPA in Delhi for 30 long years, after which I headed another school on construction project management. So basically, and I've been all along active in the field because I ran an office as well, and I have a number of projects which I've done all across the country. But now I am not going to show you any projects or any products, but I want to discuss with you a set of ideas which I think can lead to thinking about the future as the motto of this whole seminar is. At the onset, I must thank the IIA Tamilnadu Chapter, Mr. Raju in particular, and of course Korean George, who was instrumental in me coming here today. And I thank you all for being here on a Saturday morning. And I hope that you will take home something, not finished products, not solutions, but at least I hope you will take home some thought processes which I hope will be stirred in you. Urban design should not be defined as something that deals with master plans or land use plans, codes, building codes and things like that. But it's much more than that. It's actually about the lived experience of people, of cities, and ultimately the objective of urban design is to improve the lived experience of people. I think this point was also made yesterday many times over, because we had, out of yesterday's presenters, I think 80% were urban designers. And they were talking about issues of the city, and a lot of the points that I'm going to cover, you have heard from them, but in a totally different context. So urban design is also about co-production of cities, with multiple expertise, not just one expertise. It's not an isolated, field. It's a field which interconnects with landscape architecture, with conservation, with city planning, with transportation planning. Everything is brought together into the gamut of urban design. And finally, all of them, which are actually aimed at improving the experience of the city, becomes the subject of urban design. And most importantly, urban design is a participatory process. Urban design is not about the brilliance and genius of a person to define or design a wonderful city like we had Chandigarh designed by one person. It's not about that. It's about a multiple group of experts and people who are actually final beneficiaries of our design work participating in the process of production of the city. Now there are eight issues which are critical for urban design. The map you have here on the screen is of Triplicane, which was somehow been left out from all the discussions between yesterday and today. But I think Triplicane is a very critical settlement. It's a very ancient settlement, and it is also a place which has a more diverse social history than many other settlements in Chennai. Now, I'm just using Triplicane as an example of the compact city, and the new principles which drive urban design now, first one is about compactness of the city. We heard about that yesterday as well. Second thing is about its mixed use, it being mixed use, because all through these years, 60 years of planning, we had learned only to zone and separate things, and urban design makes an attempt to bring things together and not separate them. So it's about how things work together more than how they work separately more efficiently. So what we call efficiency has become an obsession with our civilization, and I think that's one of the reasons why our cities have come to this pass. So mixed use is something that brings vitality to the settlements, and it also ensures that the investments that go into infrastructure in cities are put to much better use and much better cycle of use. We have the idea of the optimum density as a central idea in urban design. It's not about maximizing density, nor is it about reducing density. You need a differentiated approach to the city, and you need an approach which is at once attempting a higher density or an optimum density, as well as one which seeks to give primacy to the natural environment, where you may require to be in lower densities. But these old cities are always, or architecture as a found object, which is ready for reuse, is always something that brings in this optimum. What is optimum at a time is achieved by the natural forces when it comes to an approach from the view of urban design. If you look at it from profitability, and if you look at it from land value and from a builder's perspective, you will get a different kind of city. So urban design takes a very definitive position towards qualitative content in the cities and defines its idea of optimum from that perspective. Then we have as a priority pedestrian and NMV, non-motorized vehicular movement, in which the speed of the city is cut down. One of the problems that we are facing today is the angst, urban angst, which is brought out by speed. We don't realize this very easily because this is a kind of an intangible experience. Our planners are always, or our traffic planners are always trying to maximize the speed. Intersections are being redesigned for maximizing speed. Flyovers are being introduced for maximizing speed. Now, where the hell are we going? What is the hurry? Have we ever stopped and asked this question? Have we reflected upon this idea of speed? Because speed is one of the reasons why there is so much tension in the urbanites. So if you have to bring quality of life to its threshold, I think reducing the speed is a very important factor. And for that, the non-motorized vehicles play a very, very important role. You can also add now electric vehicles and so on into this. But electric vehicles also have their own baggage, environmental baggage. But that's outside this discussion, so I won't go into that. So we also look for low embodied energy materials. We want to reduce the carbon footprint of the city. We want streets to be social spaces. We want streets to become areas where people can actually interact casually and look each other in the eye and cultivate relationships and friendships. We also need to see that there are sustainable social networks in communities, and we also want to protect the cultural networks. Now, if you look at all these 8 principles, you will find that this is what actually addresses all these 8 principles up front is the old city, is the existing traditional pre-industrial cities. They address all these 8 factors which are the hot new topics in urban design. The old cities address these up front, and we have failed to recognize the value of the existing city. I'm very happy to be coming after the discussion between Nalini and Sujata and George and Kavita, because I think the point that was being made is exactly this, the value of the old city. Sujata even said it in so many words that the most sustainable city is the existing city. Let's not forget that we have this as a treasure, and we have allowed them to go down in quality of environment. We have allowed them to deteriorate. And now it is time for us to rediscover this as the old city as the venue which actually can address the most avant-garde principles of urban design. I give you a few examples of this. This is an image of Jaipur. Jaipur as a city, as you know, was built in the 18th century in 1700s, and is conceived in it was conceived in the 3rd dimension. It was not conceived, Jaipur was not conceived as a land use plan. Jaipur was conceived as a pure urban design exercise. You can say that it has inherent in it planning. Of course it has inherent in it planning. It was divided on social cohesion basis, social division basis. There are things about it that we don't agree with now, and there are things about it which we agree with now. But the basic principle is that as a compact city, Jaipur is a very successful example of urban design, and as that is the kind of old city that we need to protect now, because it will be blasphemous if somebody thinks about destroying the old city of Jaipur and rebuilding multi-story buildings in that space. Next is an example of optimum density. I've given you an image of Madurai, the old part of Madurai, an old image, but Madurai is an excellent example of how, when it comes to an urban magnet and the central kind of social or spiritual function of the city, when population moves towards it on Thursdays, it just becomes a magical space. It's a kind of space that you cannot find anywhere in the world. It's a place which is so charged with the emotional investment of people in the center of the city that it automatically moves towards an optimum density. And it's a long discussion, so I will not go into many aspects of this, but it's important that we need to recognize this. We need to understand that there were traditional systems in India where old cities and old icons of Indian social network, were actually providing us with many of the objectives that we are now trying to seek in urban design deliberately. Mixed use in a small town in Tamil Nadu, the images, you can see that there is no tension in the faces of these people. There's a very entrenched domesticity in the image, but it's a commercial space. It's a shop, obviously run by the family. And you can see how relaxed the whole environment is, how the relationship between commerce and residential areas, which are usually a cause of great tension in our contemporary cities, is actually very finely resolved in small cities where you find mixed use in a very, very effective manner. I'll have to move a little faster because I have a number of issues to make. So the other thing is about pedestrian movement and non-vehicular movement. I've given you an example of Cochin, Fort Cochin, where an entire precinct is pedestrianized, and where you have time hanging in your hands. In fact, when we say we go for a holiday, or we go to a recreational spot, what happens is to us is actually it slows our sense of time down. When your sense of time is slowed down, you become reflective, you become happy, and you lose your tensions of having to meet deadlines, etc. That's why people go for holidays. Yeah? Because when they go for a holiday, they're free from that tension. And that is provided by a certain type of physical environment. There's no better place than a pedestrianized street where that can be achieved. Yesterday, we have seen many examples, some very brilliant examples of how busy streets in metropolitan cities have been converted to pedestrian heavens only by pedestrianizing them, only by ensuring that the vehicles are definitively separated from the pedestrians, and you have a safe location where time is hanging loose, where people can sit down. They don't have to run, they can sit down. Children can play, they don't have to be, kind of running to school. So there is a very important correlation between time and anxiety, and I think that is best addressed through pedestrianization. Low embodied energy materials is something that we seek for sustainability, and it is very often believed that these materials are not available in the city, or they are not, people don't like to use them. This is a very good example from Delhi of a place called the Development Alternative, who has been experimenting with cement compacted mud blocks for a long time. This is an example of a very urban office in Delhi, which is built entirely on compressed earth, and which is a very, very sustainable building. It's designed by Ashok Lal, and Development Alternative actually stands for sustainability. Their whole research, their whole aspects of work is only towards sustainability. This is in Calcutta, an example from Calcutta, where a street has been converted to a social space. We saw some examples yesterday, how streets are closed off and they can become areas where we saw examples of children from Bombay studying in a space like this. But this is in Calcutta, where the space under the flyover has been converted just by public art into a place where in the evening you have a lot of young people coming and gathering, and there are facilities or amenities that address their requirements there. So we have situations where we really create black holes within our cities by building humongous flyovers, and we have a space below that which is often neglected, or they are occupied by people who are homeless. The homeless are not provided for in our planning. And for the homeless, this is one of the best places for finding refuge from the weather, the vagaries of the weather. But in Calcutta, they have attempted this to turn that into an urban space for the middle class as well. So both the urban poor and the middle class can actually use that, free bonus product that we get in our cities under these horrendous flyovers that we have. We don't see the sky, but instead you gain some ground. In fact, it can be intelligently turned into a place, a social space, where people can come together and gather. The last objective that we have is to obtain sustainable social networks. This example is from the old part of Delhi, where on a Sunday morning you can see a large number of people who have come and gathered on the side of the street and are mostly engaged with their telephones. So their social networks are not necessarily only local. Their social networks are also global, because now we have the virtual networks, which is a different world. And the street, when it is devoid of vehicles, can potentially become a place from where you can in fact enter into your own world. Maybe there is no space at home. Many of these people may be immigrants or migrants who live in 10 to a room or 15 to a room, and the best place for them to come and get in touch with their own social networks is the side of the street. And I think these are small assets which give us lessons in urban design in our cities. As far as cultural networks are concerned, the existing city, which actually is the crucible of every city's culture, what we call our culture is actually, in fact, manufactured in the old city, manufactured in areas where there is traditional populations, and then it's consumed by the rest of the city. And the existing city is the most sustainable city, even from the standpoint of the green building approach that we want to bring about. Because all the carbon is already consumed, its footprint has already been in place. We don't create a new footprint, and we have the potential to create new spaces and new uses in reusing these places for new functions. When you talk about protecting cultural networks, it's very basic aspect of conservation, because it's fine that some investment comes in and some expertise comes in from all over the place, maybe from within India or from outside, and they can actually renovate the physical fabric. But what happens to the people is a very important thing. In most cases in India, it leads to a very severe process of gentrification, where the old existing social networks are eradicated and they are forced to move out because there's higher capital investment and new uses come in. I'm not saying that there should not be any new uses in old cities, there should be. But it cannot be at the expense of destroying the existing cultural networks in the city. The image that you have here is of Vyasa in Chennai. Believe it or not, Vyasa Muni who wrote the Vedas, came and resided near a tank in Chennai, and that place is now known as Vyasarpadi. Vyasarpadi is now an industrial site. Even when I was here in Chennai 50 years ago, Vyasarpadi was an industrial site. There were factories functioning from there. And I've gone there to see those factories. And I've never understood why the place is called Vyasarpadi. In my last visit here, I chanced upon this place, and I discovered there's a little temple for Vyasa here in Vyasarpadi. The image that you see here in black stone is the image of Vyasa, one of the few I have seen in stone. and he is a smiling man with a big mustache. Hmm? This is part of the history of Vyasarpadi. It's part of the culture of Vyasarpadi. Has this ever been recognized in planning? The entire area was actually devoted to industries, without, of course, as usual, providing no housing for the industrial workers. So the industrial workers formed a number of slums in that area. Now it is a combination of workplace come slums, which of course is a very natural combination because people who work in factories would like to live next to it. And Vyasa's temple is now overtaken by one, and there's a very small temple, most probably run by Dalits, where this Vyasa sculpture exists inside the temple. There's a little shrine for Vyasa inside there. And that is taking Chennai history, Chennai's intellectual history, back by thousands of years, maybe 2000 years. And Chennai today is one of the important intangible heritage of Chennai. In today's discussion, it did not come into feature, is actually Chennai as a center of education and knowledge creation. I would say that Vyasa's presence here was one of the first important landmark in Chennai growing into a very important knowledge creation place. The Madras University under the British period, when it was in the British capital, was one of the most important universities in the country. So the entire heritage that was described by Sujata today in front of Marina Beach, all those important university buildings and examination halls, that's all the physical infrastructure which created the intangible heritage of Chennai's knowledge systems. Now, it has a very long way to go back, and how long can you go? That's a question I'd like to leave with you on this issue. And the last image here is actually a comparison between the script that was discovered recently in Kiradi, near Madurai, on the Vaigai riverbed, and the Indus script. If you look at the scripts, you will see that it is not similar scripts, it is the same script. The Indus script, if written by another person, would look like what the Kiradi script is. And the two places are 2,000 kilometers away. So how did this happen? And let us also remember that Kiradi actually has very similar, well-planned, gridiron cities with proper sewage systems laid out. And how many years it goes back, it is still being discovered. It's going back further and further as research is progressing on Kiradi. It's not only Kiradi, there is Adichanellur and there are many other places nearby, which all have shown that there were settlements which are parallel to the Harappan settlements happening in Tamil Nadu. Where is the history of that planning gone? Has it ever been a point of discussion for anyone in the town planning circles? We still make gridiron cities because gridiron is good for automobile movement. It creates, kind of orthogonal junctions which have the least number of conflict points. So that's the logic for which we have them today. But it certainly was not the logic on which the Kiradi towns were planned. There are many, many questions that are still not asked and therefore not answered in the cultural strengths of this state. Tamil Nadu actually is, of course it was discussed yesterday, that Tamil is the oldest script in the world. Of course it's now an established fact that it's much older than Sanskrit. And it's now the evolution of the Tamil Brahmi script can be now tracked to Indus script. Did it go from here to there or did it come from there to here? That's a question you can ask. We don't have enough information to confirm that research. But realizing that this state is actually a kind of hotbed of this kind of cultural networks for a very long period of time, The only proof of that we have now is in the emotional content of the Tamil people. There are not too many other states where a political rally, you can cut your finger and put Rakta Tilak on your forehead. There are not too many people who will do it. There's a kind of very intense emotional investment of the people in their physical and social environments, and that doesn't come very easily. That comes because of the extremely profound and deep-rooted cultural networks that the state has entertained. How is that being protected now? These are not just theoretical questions. These have very practical lessons for us to look at how we have in fact brought in, or we have vulgarized the system of planning into purely for destruction of cities rather, and increasing profit and speed, of course, and not necessarily for the well-being of people. I think this is where the cultural networks need to be addressed, and not from a two-dimensional perspective like in a land use plan, but from a three-dimensional perspective where we mix anthropology, we mix urban conservation, we mix urban design, we mix planning, we mix many subjects, and we need to inquire from these multiple routes to understand this complex network which actually is driving the people. And it's the same people who are now being traumatized by the kind of planning that we see today. Now I'll move to my next part of the issue, which is climate responsive urban design. I think apart from looking at the relationship between the traditional city and modern thinking in urban design, we have to actually squarely worry about climate responsive urban design. I say climate responsive urban design because the role of the architect, the role of three-dimensional thinking, role of three-dimensional development is being shown to be very, very critical in dealing with climate issues. The best way that it has been addressed is now by the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. And the important thing about this Sustainable Development Goals is SDGs, as they are called by the UN now. The best thing about it is from the earlier perspective on environmental protection or sustainability, is that earlier it was seen as a resource that you inherited, which you should pass on to your next generation. Yeah? Now the SDGs are not about passing on resources from one generation to the other. It is about the here and now. It's about the people of cities, people of settlements, where all the 17 SDGs outlined here are actually addressing their well-being. Starts with issues like poverty, goes into quality of education, goes into water systems, goes into participatory planning, goes into land. There's only, the goal number 11, which actually talks directly about cities. The important thing is that it shifted from a sustainable viewpoint on materials to the human being. It shifted from yesterday, what we inherited, to tomorrow, where we pass on, to the here and now. That these are urgent things that need to be done now. And this is a major distinction that is now very important in terms of urban design as well, because this addresses the issue of sustainability through the human being. So the gaze is shifted from the materiality of our cultures to the human being, the human networks of our culture. There's no time to go into more details of this, so I'll just go over it. What can we do about climate responsive urban design? Because the forces of climate change at global level are already out of control. they're already unleashed. You know? You can see the kind of heat wave that's happening in Europe and US and everywhere, and the kind of erratic rains and floods and cloudbursts and heat waves that we are suffering from. It's gone totally out of control. The forces are already unleashed. Yeah? There's nothing we can do about those because that's even linked with sunspot activity, which happens once in 12 years in the sun. Yeah? That actually impacts the gravitational forces on Earth and creates massive changes in climate. There's very precious little that we can do about it, except that we can build in resilience towards the bad effects of those things. So resilience from adverse impacts can be built up through resilient urban design in 3 dimensions. This resilience cannot be only addressed from a land use plan perspective. It needs to be addressed in the 3D, because it is in the 3D that the real manifestation and physical danger of climate change is looming on us. Yeah? So resilience has been defined as the ability of a system or people to bounce back to normalcy after a disaster or hazard while minimizing the loss of life and property. This is an accepted quote, accepted by the World Bank for a project which I did here some time back. And look at the skyline of the city. This, interestingly, is from Vyasarpadi. This skyline that you see here is from Vyasarpadi. In one of these little streets is that temple for Vyasa, which goes back to how many thousand years. And you can see how differentiated the skyline is. You can see that all these big, tall buildings that you see in the horizon are actually, most of them are created by Tamilnadu Slum Clearance Board. You have some really horrendous examples. I'll show you some of them. Here is an example of an image of housing which accommodates 13,000 people. Yeah? Sorry, there are 13,000 units here. 13,000 units means in India's terms anywhere between 80 and 100,000 people. This is built without any schools, without any shops, without any job opportunities, nothing. It is just houses. It's not housing, it is just houses. Yeah? And it's also built in a low-lying area. This is extreme south of Chennai, where the flood potential is so much more higher. Many of these are not occupied. People don't want to go there. Slum dwellers who are living in real squalor and horrible conditions in the middle of the city do not want to move to these places because these are worse places. There is no supply of power most of the time, and you have to rely on a lift to go to 13th floor. If the lift is not working, they have to carry a bucket of water. Even a bucket of water for the daily use has to be carried all the way up. How many of us are willing to stay in a place like that? So naturally, the slum dwellers have not moved in here. Yeah? So I'll quickly go into the issues that we had identified in that study. The 5 issues that's been identified. One, the first and primary issue especially for Chennai, is flooding. Yeah? Second issue is earthquake. Third is fire. Fourth is health. And the fifth one, it's one word has been missed out here. It's community health. It's not just about health planning and distribution of hospitals and centers, etc., but about community health. If you look at the history of flooding in Chennai, yesterday also we saw some images on this. You have an entire watershed that's actually using Chennai for escaping into the Arabian Sea. You will find that there's a big network of swales and water movement and rivers, which finally culminate in 3 important locations in Chennai. And a total area of over 12,000 square kilometers of drains into the extended Chennai coast. This drainage system has been ponded in different locations to create a traditional watershed management plan. This traditional watershed management plan goes back to 1,000 years, where the entire sub-region northwest of Chennai, which was called Tonde Mandalam, this entire Tonde Mandalam was ponded deliberately by man-made ponds in order to retain the water, and the rice bowl of Chennai was in Tonde Mandalam. If you're talking about food security as an issue today, it was this Tonde Mandalam and the ponds here that created the conditions for the growth of rice as a main staple food. Today, these areas have become industrial areas. If Tamil Nadu is a strongly industrialized state, no quarrels with that, it's a great thing that Tamil Nadu has so many industries, massive employment, much more prosperity for people, but unfortunately they are located in this watershed area. The main reason for the floods in Chennai in 2015, if you recall how bad it was, is because our planning has been fooling around with this area. We have ruined the ponding system. Many small tanks have been closed. The big areas are still there, like Sri Perumbudur Eri and Chambrambakam and all is still there. But let's not forget that they are very badly silted because of the construction activity in that area. 500 acres, 800 acres of land is given to one industry. They concretize 75% of that land. They close all the ponds without paying any heed to the contiguous system of water management which was in place for 1,000 years before we came into the city. And today we have all that water, all that silt washing into these ponds, reducing their capacity and creating an emergency at any kind of storm surge that will come and will get arrested by the mountains. What we call the Western Ghats actually blocks it from flowing towards that, and it flows towards the east into the city. It's an issue which needs immediate attention. It's not something that we can wash away or we can think does not exist. This is a real problem of doing a master plan for Chennai. It's not something that you can push under the carpet and pretend that it doesn't exist. 2015 to now, precious little has been done to address the problem of the watershed. Yeah? Some of these maps you have already seen, but this information is freely available on the net. You can see how under different conditions of heat and climate change, different levels of climate change, how Chennai coast is going to be affected. All the lovely buildings that we talked about on the Marina beach, all along the beach, I'm sorry to say, Sujata, in 30 years' time, they might be underwater. Yeah? Anyway, Marina beach is not going to exist. Chennai, which is so badly deprived of open spaces and neighborhood parks, you have no green places where you can take your child. You either go to the beach or you go to the zoo. There is no parks, open spaces available. Whatever is available there is so poor, so bad, severely industrialized that they are not usable by children anymore. So we have actually, yesterday we saw the data also, Chennai has the least amount of per capita green space. And all these, the open spaces that we use now are all along the waterfront. And they are unfortunately going to be underwater very soon you have the different scenarios here. By 2050, by 2080, and in 2080 is a close-up that is given here. You can see that almost entirely that whole region near Adyar will go underwater. Yeah? So there are 4 ways in which climate is being impacted by flood. One is cyclones and storm surges, which are, as you know, due to the global impact of climate change, is increasing every day. Second thing is the rainfall that's exceeding the capacity of rivers and tanks, which has been aggravated by our human action of planning industrial areas in those places. And third is about construction in low-lying areas, which are deliberately being done today. Deliberately, low-lying lands are being allotted for housing for the poorest who have the least amount of resilience in the case of a flood. They don't have the finances to even look after the diseases that will come after a flood. They don't have even the social resilience because their settlements are actually on the road. Their livelihood is earned on the road. So when there is a flood, it's not just a question of a household being washed out, it's also their livelihood is washed out. Anyway, I will not go into more details of it. So basically, the last and important issue is sea level rise. Sea level rise is something that we cannot deal with. The image that you see here is only a warning. It is said that when the temperature on Earth goes up by 2 degrees, on land it goes up to 4 degrees. Yeah? And along with that, you will have the sea water level rising. We know that the melting that's going on in the North Poles, etc., are impacting that. Kerala is already very badly affected. Many of the traditional 500-year-old settlements, villages in Kerala along the coast have gone underwater, already underwater. I'm not talking about future. I'm talking about now. There's already knee-deep water inside homes in many of the traditional settlements in Kerala along the waterfront. Already in the last few years, about 800 acres land is already eaten up by the sea. On one side you have the sea level rise. On the other side you have the mountain waters coming down the rivers and lakes. In the case of sea level rise, we can do precious little because these are global forces, because of our living styles, our civilizational errors that we made. And on the other side, because of our own planning systems, we have now worse and worse floods happening. So we are caught between these two forces coming, one from the sea and one from the mountains. There's a recent photograph from Bombay where the storm surge is just beginning to take place. It is said that by 2050, Bombay may go underwater. Most of Bombay will go underwater. I mean, it's a terrible scenario. It's an unthinkable scenario. South Bombay, which is the cultural hub of Bombay, which has got the best architecture, it has got the best heritage, will be entirely underwater. Because Bombay was actually a set of ponds which are recovered and rebuilt, which we are doing now in Chennai. We are closing down the tanks and building housing on top of it, and also factories on top of it. So the vulnerabilities are at different levels. The precinct level vulnerabilities are of particular interest to us urban designers and architects. So I'll highlight that. The foundation costs of buildings will disproportionately rise as the load-bearing capacity of the land will be low when it floods. Yeah? So we are going to invest more and more money into the underground, into the foundations, which will automatically demand that per capita development, per square meter capita, per square meter development has to be high in order to be able to meet the cost that we pump into the ground. Yeah? So it has a very direct bearing on not only foundation design, but also on the urban form that will have to finally follow. Yeah? Then post-development, the land will tend to flood locally, and the higher moisture content in the soil will impact the longevity of the construction. We all know that we now built with a lot of steel, and steel is extremely vulnerable to oxidation through water, and this is going to be one of the causes of this. Then concretization and construction of such locations will increase the water runoff to cause more flooding. That is, not only that the areas which are closed now and become concretized will create more runoff. So there will be more water running into lakes, more water running into to streams and areas, which has already lost their capacity because they are silted by our other levels of activities. So a series of environmental problems are unleashed by building in low-lying areas, which will further deplete the already diminishing water table. Now, saline incursion is an important issue in Tamil Nadu. We know that all along the coast we have higher and higher salinity coming into the ground, and more kilometers of areas along the waterfront are devoid of drinking water. This problem will get even more accentuated. I only outlined a few things here because a lot of us are building resorts, etc., near the beach and near the water systems. And I can tell you that all these are going to be in further jeopardy if the flooding conditions continue. I'll quickly talk about earthquake. Chennai was not listed as a vulnerable zone. It's been listed as a low vulnerability zone. But now it has been upgraded to a moderate dangerous zone. In other words, the zoning of earthquake areas are being upgraded to include more and more areas, and Chennai is now part of this. The image here shows how an earthquake in Gujarat, in Bhuj, where I happened to travel when the earthquake was happening, immediately after the earthquake happened, you can see how columns actually get twisted in an earthquake. Because there's so much torsion in the columns, and what we call, these stilted buildings where we have parking and other activities. We saw some wonderful stilted buildings yesterday also. They are much more susceptible because the stilted columns, this is the condition of a stilted column in Bhuj in the 2000 earthquake, which is my own photograph. I happened to travel there at that time. You can see how it gets totally twisted. So there is a very direct danger to architecture, the area where we are active with. And of course there are prescriptions for it, which may cause less damage, but there is no way that we can eliminate the damage. We can reduce the damage. We can reduce loss of life. It's an example of how in Bhuj, an entire stilted floor in the ground floor collapsed, and the building was sitting on its nose on the ground. That is the first floor balconies. You can walk out into the ground from the first floor balconies. So the entire building tilted and collapsed because the whole clear story gave way. It's called soft story in earthquake parlance. The next issue is fire. We know that there are fire regulations in place, but they are not always followed. Particularly in Chennai, none of the low-income housing that is being built officially follow any fire regulations. Even the newest ones which are yet to be occupied are not fire regulated. What is the risk of this is for anyone to realize. The images, one here shows the Chennai Silks fire, and the other image is from Bombay. I'll move faster. I think I've taken a lot of time. And so mitigating measures through urban design for climate responsive design. First one is location. The location of the building should be only decided after a vulnerability analysis. We do nothing of that sort. We just grab the project if it's a big one, and we just do it without looking at how vulnerable the location is. Orientation, of course, we know can save from climate issues. Building typology, which is the basic building block in urban design, becomes an important aspect of development because typology has a series of implications on various types of heat. Then, of course, building materials, facade, roof treatment, air flows, etc., etc. Then we also have radiation that impacts microclimate. So we need to, at precinct level, we need to do reduced hard paving, non-reflective surfaces. It's very fashionable to have a lot of glass and mirror glass on top of it sometimes. They are extremely harmful from an urban design perspective. They might protect the building from inside. And in a way, it is a metaphor for the myopic view of the architect who is only worried about his own building, his own plot. What is the impact of that form on the exterior and at a precinct level is not looked at. It has a massive impact on microclimate. Then open jointed paving to allow water flow as well as to reduce heat. Then landscape strategies have to be planned with climate change in mind. Then we need to have reduced radiation through materials that we use. Health is also an important issue. It is now increasingly realized that one of the basic functions of governance is to provide proper social amenities to its people. If a government or a municipality is able to provide social amenities, it's considered good governance. This is the popularity on which the Aam Aadmi Party is now riding, because they have very effectively put in place both education for the poor as well as for provision for health. I won't read all the text here because I'm almost running out of time. We have issues of typology, water sanitation systems, cyclical design of urban system to deal with resource and waste. Yesterday we saw some examples of zero waste buildings. Then there's the 15-minute city concept, which is now gaining popularity in many parts of Europe, where in 15 minutes you can access every amenity that you need from a city, so that it becomes walkable or cyclable, and therefore you reduce the load on consumption of fossil fuels. As well as you gain there are hundreds of other gains from improving walkability. But reducing the fossil fuel consumption is one of the objectives that we will be forced to meet with this. And these are the few things that we can do, like these are the balms that you can put on the problems which are going to be there due to climate change. This is not going to cure the disease, but at best what we can do is we all have to mitigate the negative impact through climate responsive urban design. Then we have also health parameters built into the urban design structure. When a plan is being approved, I think it's important that you don't create 13,000 housing units in a place without the fundamentals of social amenities and workplaces built into such a plan. Such a plan should not be passed. There is no bylaw which tells you to do that. But what we have to, even if there is a bylaw, those people who build those massive things don't care about the bylaw, and precious little can be done to them in our present political system. We all know that. It's a dark side of our story. I don't want to go there. But health parameters must become an aspect of urban design output. So to sum up all this is a very interesting diagram from the British architect Richard Rogers. Richard Rogers wrote a wonderful book, 20 years ago, called Cities for a Small Planet. It's a tiny book, looks like a brochure of something. If you get hold of it, please read it. Richard Rogers is no more, he just died last year. Please read that book, and this image is from that book, where he talks about much before all this circularity of structures were talked about now. 20 years before that, Richard Rogers generated this diagram in his little book called Cities for a Small Planet. This is talking about the linearity, which is now we are consuming resources, turning them into poison. And again, consuming resources, which cyclically has been imbuing the same poison that we give out. So we are not only polluting the internal environment of people, but also we are polluting the external environment. Now in a circular metabolism, there is a process through which there's a deliberate attempt, there's a planned system by which production consumption cycles can be regulated to remain healthy within each other. I'll very quickly go to the last section of my talk. How many more minutes have I already exceeded my time? Yeah? Okay, and I'll just read through the text for you. This is the whole section on a new concern that has it hasn't begun to worry the planners. It hasn't begun to worry the city fathers. But I think as urban designers, we have to worry about them. Because if you look at post-pandemic urban design, the pandemic and the physical structure of the city has a very direct correlate. Yeah? We know that currently there's a certain network system of cities which function today, and the pandemic has played itself out differently in all these places. Have we looked at this as a case, an example? Have we generated any data to study how the size and shape and connectivity of a settlement was impacted by the pandemic? What was the viral load in these places? Do we have any data? We have none. Yeah? I'll just very quickly go through it. The second issue, which is so pertinent in our country, as a post-pandemic thinking about planning or urban design, is that the lockdown brought us so many lessons which we have not quantified or looked at. Yeah? The lockdown demonstrated the gross national level regional imbalance in India. We had hundreds of thousands of people walking towards their home in desperation because there was a lockdown, sudden lockdown. It has multiple implications about the sensitivity of governance towards people. That's one issue. At the other level, why are these people leaving? We did not leave. Why are they leaving? Have you ever asked that question? Because they are extremely insecure, having a very nebulous relationship with the city in terms of their economics. They are forced to flee the city, and there was no transport available, so they walked it. Yeah? So marginalization of labor in the corporate city. Our cities have become more and more corporate, and as more and more investments are being invited through competitive, city systems, we are neglecting the people who are actually producing the city. They have no place to stay. They have no medical facilities. They have no insurance. They walk great lengths. They are living in polluted environment. They don't have basic services. Actually, those people are subsidizing the cost of our buildings. In India, we are building cheap because these people are subsidizing us. By not having all this, if they got a proper wage, of course low wage is unspeakably low, they get low wages and no facilities. That's a subsidy that we enjoy because then we make glitzy buildings by their labor. Yeah? And we don't pay them. That's the reason why the scene that you see here was in Bombay at the railway station. People trying to run away from the city because we have marginalized them entirely in the system. Yeah? Housing was always inaccessible for migrant labor. Okay? When you become a slum dweller, it's the second stage of an immigrant becoming slum dweller. Over a period of time, they become a political entity. They are a vote bank, so they get attention in terms of rehabilitation. But the immigrant labor has no housing access. Yeah? Then we have inaccessible social amenities. It's absolutely not accessible to them. There are no systems through which social amenities are delivered at site except through some charitable trusts. Yeah? Why should they be living on charity when they are producing the city, when they are giving their whole labor towards construction? And they have very insecure, very irregular incomes. So there is, all these are few lessons which I have culled out from the lockdown, from the phenomena that we saw in the lockdown, where thousands of laborers were fleeing the city. They were walking, 200 kilometers, 250 kilometers. They were walking with aged parents and children, carrying them, some of them on the shoulder. Yeah, this is unspeakable, the conditions. Yeah? And this is the condition that pandemic has brought to fore. That we have been complacent in believing that these people are well looked after and they're producing these lovely things for us at a very cheap rate, because we are enjoying their subsidy. Yeah? This is a pandemic lesson, because it was not clear till the pandemic actually happened. So conditions were very different in the old cities and in slums. You can read some of them if you can, because I won't go into more details. The long and short of it is that we have no data for this. How will you have data when the government is denying that there was a pandemic? They were saying there was no migration. What are you talking about? If you are talking about migration, you are an anti-national. That's the condition we have come to, where the government is just ignoring the fact that the pandemic has brought in this kind of load on the social amenities of people. And how are we going to plan with it if we don't have the data? So how did the pandemic play itself out in this dichotomous structure of cities, where you have low-income housing, you have slums, you have old cities, you have glitzy new cities, you have CBDs, and you have rotting industrial centers. How will we ever plan this if we don't understand how the pandemic actually played out in these areas? For that, if we want to understand that, we need to generate the data for it. So you will have to go to the crematoriums and burial grounds and get the list of people who buried there. You will see that it's 7 to 9 times more than what is reported officially. That's the real scale of the issue. And without that data, we can forget about planning for the future. So the most critical point to make is that we need to bring about a system of development which can automatically generate this data, and this data can be made available to scientific community for thinking and planning about it. So inequity of access is the next issue. I won't go into detail. You're all aware that very iniquitous system we have. The image you have here is from a super specialty hospital in Delhi. You can see how accessible this is to the urban poor. You can just by the physical setup of this is done by us architects. I'm not saying that we should not have super specialty hospitals. I'm saying while we need super specialty hospitals, the absence of community health facilities at accessible levels remain an issue. Is that when you actually need 10 community clinics, we get one super specialty hospital. Because super specialty investment is linked to the global investment. It's far easy to bank on it. It's far easy to mobilize it for governments. So that is being promoted. Whereas simple things like having a proper family doctor for every community is not part of the plan. So pandemic has brought this into the focus, that we require on one hand close neighborhood level attention to health. At the same time, we also need super specialty hospitals which can deal with the conditions of the pandemic. So both these dichotomous conditions have come into being, and there is no data on any of them, on how to plan any of them. So open space usage and functions are another thing which has been impacted widely by pandemic. The manner in which people use open spaces and the manner in which people interact in public spaces has completely changed. What are these changes? How do we accommodate for these changes in future? Of course, in the case of Chennai, there are no green and public spaces for housing areas and so on. There are no parks available. We probably don't have to worry about it because it's just not there. Okay, that should be our worry rather than thinking about how to mediate the use of people of these public spaces. So the planning standards may get affected, and fear of viral load is impacting various ways in which people come out and interact with others. Now, an important aspect for as far as we are concerned, architects are concerned, is the issue of typology and contamination. This is an aspect which we need to study as a community. We should, because we use building typologies, we generate these buildings. This is the housing in Bombay. We generate these cubby holes in which people are just packed. What happens if there is another wave of pandemic? How vulnerable are these? How do viral load travel through sewage systems? Do we have any studies? Do we have any? Nothing is done. So I think this is an area which requires close attention by architects as a community, and I would urge institutions like IIA should be in the forefront of generating this research. So building and settlement typologies are the basic ingredients, building blocks of a city. Yeah? And if you want to look at how they are going to impact pandemic, we need to study them. We have not done that. Then lack of fresh air and fixed glass air-conditioned containers have proven to be super spreaders. Every place, including the hotel in which I stayed today, I examined it. The windows are not openable. Yeah? So what happens when there is no fresh air? We know that an air conditioning system, centralized system, functions best when all windows are not openable. Yeah, because it traps the air inside. But it also traps the virus. Yeah? And many of the office towers that we see today are designed with plain glass which is not openable. And during the pandemic, they were all abandoned. Nobody went back to work in those spaces. People have gone back now without realizing that they are living in spaces where the viral load is very high. It's not only that the virus cannot escape because everything is blocked, the air conditioning duct is transmitting the virus. The next impacted thing is public transport. A lot of us who can afford not to get into public transport are doing so now because we know that it's a super spreader. It's capital intensive, and public transport systems and lower passenger capacities inhibit cost recovery. But we continue to build more and more of this kind of expensive, capital intensive public transport system without paying any heed to what would happen to them in future uses during pandemics. This is my last slide. I'm sorry for having taken a lot of time. Last question as an urban designer for me is urban form consequential in any way? Urban form, the city form, is it consequential in any way? I think there are enough reasons to believe that it is highly consequential. Yeah? Post-pandemic, will our cities grow exactly like this? Like the image you have here is of New York, Midtown New York. Financial imaginaries and urban form will need to converge for a more equitable post-pandemic city. It's a tall order, okay? It's very easily said that they must converge, but they don't converge. Yeah? And in the urban design of these cities, will it be business as usual? Post-pandemic and our pre-pandemic thinking, will it be impacted by our post-pandemic thinking? Have we thought about it? Have we thought about the consequences of the kind of form we are creating? Will the city production process leave people out or develop a robust community health project through participation? These are some suggestions. I'm only asking these questions because I don't have the answers to these. The pandemic is still playing itself out. It's not fully flowered into a thing which you can study in its wholeness, nor do we have the data to study it. But the questions are very clear that there are massive impact on the way we built on the health of communities. And that's been exacerbated through the pandemic. And all that we need to do is to start opening our eyes now towards these consequences and work towards what we call a future. A future is always the result of the insecurities of today. Okay? And the pandemic has demonstrated our insecurities. The more we uncover, the more insecurities we uncover, the more pointers we'll get towards a future. So it's about today and not about tomorrow. Thank you. I'll stop with that. This is a cartoon by Ponnappa, who is a product of SAP. And it talks about Bangalore's air quality. I've just put it here to say thank you to my old college as well, because they put me forward to think about cities in a way that I finally went and became an urban designer. And those seeds were planted in the libraries of SAP. In my undergrad days, probably by reading Louis Mumford, that it opened my eyes in the 60s, it opened my eyes towards the maladies of modernism and modern planning. I think the issues which we are confronting now, in terms of climate change, in terms of unsustainable development, in terms of the post-pandemic city, these are very much in the thinking, these are very much in the thinking of the early urban designers who did so 60, 70 years ago. And I would stop with this. Thank you very much for your time, and sorry for overshooting time. Thank you very much.